to here to the gallery to see our work and to be here for the tour. My name's Kathy Fujioka. I'm one of the 5 Sansei granddaughters, and we have 2 more of the Sansei granddaughters here. Ellen Bev is over here, and Sherry Arai DuBoer. So I want to start with my piece right here. I have this piece in the show, and I have the cherry blossom art in the corner, and then I have 2 pieces on the wall in the far end. So my grandfather and his brother owned a wholesale plant nursery in Berkeley in the 1920s, and it was a very thriving business. And before the war, or during the war, once Roosevelt announced the 9066, my family knew that they had to give away and basically move their inventory. So they started giving it away. They tried selling it. They ended up donating most of their inventory. And among their inventory, they had lots of flowers and plants and shrubs and trees. And they ended up, from what I understand, that there's a story where they grew thousands of flowering cherry blossom trees. And they donated over 1,000 of those trees to the city of Berkeley, along with other nurseries who also donated thousands of trees. And the mayor of Berkeley at the time, Mayor Ament, told my grandfather, thanked him for his gracious gift and said, "One who plants a tree plants love, and you will be long remembered for this gift." And he was long forgotten, so I'm here to continue his legacy. So yeah, this piece here is titled "The Legacy of Fuji Nursery," and it all began when my uncle came to me with a photograph. It was a panoramic photograph, and he asked me to do something with it. And I wasn't making incarceration art during that time, which was about 16 years, back in 2012, I think is when I got the photo. And so I sat on the photo for a while, and then a friend of mine, Naomi Judy Shintani, asked me to be in an exhibit in San Francisco, one of the schools there. And so I made this was my first incarceration piece from 2014. And since that time, I've been creating, the incarceration work started to come out, and my work became very political. I didn't even know that it was happening. It just seems like nowadays almost everything that I make has a political note to it, where before it didn't. And it's amazing how that happens when you become an activist and you have a story to tell. So that's basically what my work is about. And now we're going to move over to Reiko Fuji. She's very well known for this, her beautiful glass kimono right here. And her family had a farm, and they left the farm. I guess the grandfather had gotten arrested, and he asked the wife and the mother to sell all the chickens and to sell everything that they had so that they could purchase the property. So they actually were able to buy the property before they were interned. And sorry, I have some notes here that I'm going off of. The kimono consists of over 2,000 pieces of hand-cut glass, and it's fused together to make 240 frames. Each frame has an image fused into the glass that was taken while in a camp. This kimono was tied together with copper wire and was designed to be worn. And with the slightest movement, the bottom rows click together. So when you and Reiko actually wore this kimono in some exhibits that she's had, and it makes a really beautiful noise. And not this particular one, but she has others that she's also made that she's worn, and it's really heavy, so it's difficult for her to wear these days.
So is it okay?
And it makes the sound of wind chimes.
Is it okay if we take pictures?
Yeah, yeah, you can take photos. Let me see here. She's got another piece that we could talk about. She interviewed a number of people about their experiences in camp and receiving permission to use their photos that were taken while they were imprisoned. And she decided to use the photos and other personal photos to make a glass kimono to honor those who were incarcerated during World War II. The detained alien enemy glass kimono number 2 is the second one with 40 new photos included. Reiko's family, they were at Manzanar, and the Inabas lived in Riverside, but went to LA to be with her great uncle, Hideo's wife's family, so that the relatives could stay together. And her father lived in LA, having just returned from the age of 12 to 18, and he volunteered to be one of the first to go to the intense, go to the Manzanar because of the intense prejudice that was rampant after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So, Sherry, where's Sherry? Is Sherry here? I'm sorry, Ellen. Ellen, why don't you talk about your pieces? Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Thanks. I'm still here, so I'll
So this is a series I did. They're collages, and soon after the murders of the 6 women of Asian descent in Atlanta, Georgia, in March of last year, it just affected me really profoundly, and I wanted to create a tribute to them, and so I created the collages. But before that, actually, I had first created the bottom panels of each of these the year before, after the murder of George Floyd, and so these were my way of processing his death and what happened around his death. And then a year later, when the women were killed, I brought those pieces out, and I found a way to connect the two, because I felt like the reason for their deaths were very much similar due to racism and white supremacy. So I created a way to connect the two, and then I painted natural images like leaves and flowers to combine the two incidents and sort of give a feeling of healing and an interconnectedness and sort of a feeling of soothing each other. And the reason I use white paint is, in Asian culture, white is the color of death and purity. So I used white and natural elements to just bring a feeling of calm and soothing. So this is called The Fallen Atlanta. And then in addition, I felt like it was important to just give a little personal story about each woman. And we didn't really hear that much when they were killed. So you know, you read about, if you look a little bit, you can find out that they were ordinary people like ourselves with simple lives, you know, grandmothers. One woman was wanting to retire shortly after so she could be with her grandchildren. So I felt like it was important to give their stories and give their human touch. No, well, the media report was the murderer had a bad day, and so yeah. This was March of 2021. Just last year. Yeah. 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 Probably not. Okay, so shall we move to the other side? I have 3 more pieces on the other side. I thought that was you. You've heard this story before.
Yeah, but I didn't get to see everything. How are you, Lenore?
So I have these pieces. I'll talk about this one first, which I call Targets. And this is a piece of Japanese indigo dyed cotton. And it's this width because that's the size of the loom. And I think you know, because your dress is beautiful. This is indigo cotton as well. And you can see the design on your dress is the same kind of stitching. And it's a traditional Japanese stitching technique called sashiko. So I started with a very traditional design on top. And I started this piece about 10, 12 years ago, and I was wanting to pay tribute to the people who perished in the Hiroshima Nagasaki bombings. So I did a rendering of the bomb, the atomic bomb called Little Boy. And I chose to use the sashiko technique because I wanted to show the irony of doing something really horrendous in a very kind of a mundane hand stitching technique. So I did that, and then I continued with some of the vocabulary that was connected to the bomb, and then I came down to more targets, Executive Order 9066 80 years ago, and then the 10 concentration camps where Japanese Americans were sent. And then at the bottom I have the beginning of the Pledge of Allegiance, unfinished, just to sort of suggest that this was the time where people were, you know, Japanese Americans felt very loyal to this country, but then war came and they couldn't even finish the Pledge of Allegiance, so that's why I didn't finish that at the end. So that's targets. And then here we have, I call this Heart Mountain Hoppy. Most of my family was sent to Heart Mountain, Wyoming to camp, and so I wanted to pay tribute to them, but also my Hirokubep was my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, and while he was in camp he wrote this will, and so I felt like I needed to honor him and my family by placing this onto the form of a hoppy made out of glassine envelopes. And I took his will and I photocopied parts of it, cut them up and put them into the glassine envelopes. And then later, if you're interested, you can go to this side, and I took copies of his little notebook diary, this big, and I photocopied those and put them on transparencies, and I inserted those into the glassine envelopes on this side. So you could read what he was thinking about and what he was writing at the time, and it can be kind of disturbing because he was thinking about the the Holocaust. I mean, he was thinking about what was happening in Germany at the time, and he was making notes about that. So I just imagine he was wondering what was going to happen to them. You know, that was the thought. But so this is a tribute to him. This is supposed to be, I just drew Heart Mountain, and you know, it's a very haunting kind of a symbol, because it's usually you see a jacket like this with a person in it, but it's just empty, and so giving that feeling of emptiness and sadness too. And then this piece is a tribute to my grandmother, and she was a flower arrangement teacher, so she had left a couple of her really cool vases. This is a very heavy solid brass vase that she used often, and I can remember her doing these flower arrangements when I was a child. And but I wanted to use it with a cutout. I did a cutout of a copy of one of the posters that was used to round up people. They posted these on posts out, you know, in the streets, notifying people that they had to go to detention camps and then to the regular camps. So I wanted to, you know, suggest the horror that they were feeling, and, you know, this feeling like, well, I am an American, and it was important to have this on the poster itself. And I put sand inside the vase, which usually holds water, of course, with the poster coming out. Just again, juxtaposing that irony of, you know, this sand represented the wastelands where they finally ended up, out in the boonies in Wyoming. And then I used these are her cloths that I had saved, and a handmade table by my dad. So that's, this one I call Scarred.
So did you ever go to Heart Mountain?
I just went about 2.5 weeks ago for the first time. There was a formal pilgrimage to Heart Mountain, so I was able to go. And
Was there anything left there, or is it just?
well, now it's a historic site, and I think part of the national park system. So there's a wonderful interpretive center there, where they actually did a really good job. It's like a museum, and you can learn about. They really did a good job about the history of what really happened, and it's curated quite well. Yeah, it's not huge, but I think it's quite thorough. Yeah, so it was important to go there. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Very nice.
And then I think Sherry's going to talk about her. Sherry?
Oh, next. Actually, since Naomi's not here,
Yes.
I'll just talk real quickly about these two panels. So this one talks about the Japanese American history of immigration, incarceration, and the resilience. But what it does is it sends a longer history. You know, that incarceration didn't happen just, you know, because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, that there was a long history of racism, and for several other reasons, you know, the economic success of farmers, Japanese American farmers. And so what this panel tries to do is give a more comprehensive history, and then it talks about the life incarcerated, especially here at Tanforan. And then, so I think you guys, have we talked about the history? Yeah, Tanforan was the racetrack. Then they made it into a temporary detention center for like 6 months. And then most people were taken to Topaz or to longer term camps. And then it talks about afterwards struggles towards reparations and justice and some of the things going on today. And then this one is about artist Lucien Kubo, who's also a Sansei, 3rd generation, Japanese American. And she's an activist and an artist, and her family was incarcerated at Tanforan. So this is a photo of her grandmother while she was here at Tanforan. And she has all these letters, mementos that have it. So there's an excerpt here. And Lucienne is very active today in civil rights and activities. So it talks about that history. So let's see. So this over here is some of my work, and tying into history. These 4 watercolors were done while incarcerated. My father's uncle did these 2 at Tule Lake Camp in Northern California, and then he did these later. He was moved to Topaz in Utah, and he did these. And I think, you know, especially this one, it shows the winter, and that's a pile of coal. And so they had art classes there, and I'm sure he took those art classes because he has like 3 or 4, actually 4 of these. And trying to the telephone poles are kind of wonky in some of them, and then he learns perspective. So this one is probably his later one with a person even in it. So then I could tell that later on the one's dated 44, I think 43, a little looser. He has more people. Yeah, so that was interesting. So these, you know, he wasn't an artist. He was a nurseryman. And one of my uncles said that's the only time they ever saw him draw or paint was while he was there, because he couldn't do, you know, his other hobbies. And then this is a chest that came from one of the camps that they shipped back. So when they left the camps, they were able to ship stuff back. I mean, they were only given $25, but they could ship stuff. So I don't know if he shipped this. And then one of his other hobbies, I think, was collecting rocks and polishing them. So we had this whole big crate of these rocks. So I thought maybe he just did it out of spite to ship all this heavy stuff. I don't know. But so I think that went on today. But he polished rocks, and then what they did at Tule Lake was a dry lake bed, and they collected the shells, and so they could make art pieces and little objects of beauty. And so inside, if you look later, there's little pins and hair pieces that they made. They're just beautiful and so intricate with these tiny little shells. So in my family's garage, when I was cleaning out my parents' house, they had turned out, which I had never seen, jars of these shells and other shells that they collected. I have a whole box of clam shells. I thought I would make something out of them, but it's very, I have a greater appreciation for how difficult that is to do those little pieces. So inspired, these are 2 of my watercolors that are inspired by the crafts and the shells that they made during camp. So to prepare, these are new pieces for the show, and I spent a lot of time thinking about processing what life was like for them, because they never talked about it much, my parents. And, you know, my great uncle, he died before I was born, so I never knew him. But yeah, they just didn't talk about it much. They did I grew up knowing about it because when, you know, aunts and uncles would come visit, their peers, they would just talk about it, and they'd just say camp. And I knew it was an injustice, but I just, you know, so it's growing up, it was really, if I was singled out in school or something for being Japanese American, I mean, I found it very difficult. I didn't know how to frame it, I didn't know how to talk about it. So that was one of the reasons why I went on the pilgrimage with, you know, many years later with the 4 other artists, and it's really helped me a lot because I wanted to learn how to frame it, how to talk about it. Going to the pilgrimage, seeing the other speakers, seeing young folks, and then my fellow artists was really helpful. So that's what this one is based on. There's tools around the edges. These were some of the tools that they could have in camp to make some of the crafts. And so they were allowed to do some woodworking and painting, crocheting, stitching. And so that's what this is some people, I mean, I think the more skilled craftsmen made this Buddhist altar, like a Butsudan, household Buddhist altar. And then in the background of both of these, and with a series of works that you'll see in there, I always have these distinctive mountains at Tule Lake, Castle Peak, and Abalone Mountain. And you'll see that in the back of the artwork there. And all the photos, there's always, those are kind of looming behind, and the dust. Yeah. So that's what those are. I have 4 other pieces over there, which, yeah. So I don't know, it's kind of, come over here. So, speaking of dust, this one is a print that I did, and I was doing them as studies. It's called monotype, but they're one-of-a-kind prints. But I was just doing it as a study for my watercolor months ago. And it came up, and what happens with a monotype is that you run it through a press, and so what you've painted on this plate, you don't always know what you're gonna get. It's kind of like photography. And so all of this, it had evoked of dust. And so I said, oh, I gotta go with that. So that's what these two, similar symbols with the shells and over time and how they were used as to make objects of beauty. And then the top 2 are etchings that I did quite a while ago, but they had to do with my family history and not necessarily about incarceration, but you know, that's part of my family history, and so that's what I included. One of the watercolors, it's a photo image of the barracks that my great uncle did, and then other objects. My family grew up in Sacramento, so that's my mother as a young girl in boarding house, late 20s before the war. And then the receipt from Camellia City Nursery, which my grandfather's had ran before the war, and they lost that business. So, but they were nurserymen, so they didn't have that to come back to after the war. And then this image, which is used on the banner, is called Lock Luggage. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to do with the incarceration. It's just, those were pieces that my family had stored in the garage. It's my dad's army trunk and then other relatives. And actually that leather suitcase was what those old watercolors were stored in, my great uncle's. And so it just evoked me, you know, it just makes me think of them. And the keys are, you know, whatever you want to think of those. Locking in secrets, I kind of think of it as the stories that we probably won't know. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry.
Hey, then I was just going to talk a little bit about my work again, and then we'll end with my cherry blossom installation. As you know, my family had the nursery, and it started out. You can actually come inside. Please feel free to walk into it because you could see the faces and the details of how it was made and so forth. But it started out honoring my family, and then when COVID hit, I started hearing about all these people who were dying, and I wanted to include many of them into my installation. And so from the top, I use Shinto arrows, which are Japanese arrows that are made to protect the home. The Shinto arrows are actually the white ones that I had purchased around the time I started making my installation. But I didn't have enough of them once we got invited to this exhibit, so I had to, I searched everywhere for the arrows and I was unsuccessful, so I purchased some black arrows and kind of made my own to just help with the install. And I really enjoyed making these. It was very peaceful for me. And as I worked on each piece, I made over 40 cherry blossoms, and each one has a photo of someone very special, whether I knew them or not, whether they were killed by the hands of police, or they died a peaceful death, or they were someone I knew, and my pets are in here also. So with each one that I made, like here's my little dogs, I feel them. as I'm making them. So it's kind of a spiritual feeling that I encounter in a good way, and it feels good to be able to do something like this for people that I don't even know, like the little boy who died in the wildfires holding his beloved dog. Wyatt Tofty is, where is he? Oh, here. Yeah, here he is, yeah. So he burned in the car with holding his dog with his grandmother in the car. They thought they were sheltering in the car, but it just, was just, and he was from Oregon. So upon learning that story, I made a big painting for him, and I also honored him in my cherry blossom installation. So it says, it's known that the cherry blossom flowers are the unofficial national flower in Japan, and also that the farmers in Japan, they traditionally pray to the sakura trees, the cherry blossom trees, in hopes that the gods would bless their harvest. And in Japan, my ancestors have had rice farms, and they still do today, so I can kind of see where that comes from. And then when my grandparents immigrated here, they started a nursery, and then they helped my father start a nursery, which I worked at for many years, and then eventually I was able to reconnect with my art. So that's been a good thing. And then I've got a couple more pieces in the back. This one is a piece of my photo montage of my grandfather. He was probably in his 30s at this time, and he is sowing seed. But actually, he's surrounded by his crop. He's at Gila River. That's the first camp that they were incarcerated at. And he's sowing the seeds of hope. So it's like with gold leaf, the seeds are kind of slipping through his hand. And he has a very somber face because his wife and children were in Japan. So he was by himself with his brother and his brother's family. So, and behind the barbed wire. And this piece is more of a immigration piece, more about intergenerational. I included my mother, who she loved Jackie Kennedy, and she kind of had her. I know, she just loved her. I just remember that, and she was so proud when she got her citizenship. And she didn't really speak good English, but she tried. She went to night school, and she earned her citizenship. So she was very proud of that, and and this is the time when Trump. Just before he was voted into office. So we were being activists. I included my family members in here, my son-in-law, my sister, my daughter. And my daughter was pregnant at the time, and so I included a little baby, like a power fist, like this. And there's a peace sign in her other side, but it's just kind of like, and with the symbolism of cherry blossom, it's really about the transitions in life. And that life is ephemeral and fleeting, and the cherry blossom flower really only, it has a short lifespan of only 2 weeks. And we don't know how long our lifespan is going to be, so it's, very similar that way. But, so that's it for me. And this area here is our artist Judy Naomi Shintani, and she actually wanted me to focus on a piece on the other end, but I'm just going to quickly and you can come back and do some more exploring. But this is a really fascinating piece here, her bird cage, and she interviewed some years back now, she interviewed a lot of people, and she got stories from them about the incarceration, and it's interactive. You can open these little pockets up and learn about, what the people had to say. And then she has them write things on paper. And if you have a story to add, you're free to do that also. And this is one of her latest works. It's a replica of the cots that they slept in. For example, here at Tanforan, they didn't have enough housing. They were trying to make housing, but for 8,000 people, they just couldn't make enough housing. So they had to sleep literally in the barns, or in the horse stables, actually. And they had to stuff their cots with hay. So it's really sad that they did that, but you know, they were treated like that, and that's it's really inhumane. And the government tries to hide a lot of these stories. They don't really want it to be out, but we're here to say this is really what happened. So, and we have lots of stories that we've been told by our elders. So we're doing our best to keep the word out. And over here, a piece that Naomi wanted me to talk about. This is titled The Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is constructed of wood from Tule Lake, one of the concentration camps. And her father was imprisoned there during his teenage years. She wanted to create a piece from the wood that they gathered to make a remembrance of her father-daughter trip to Tule Lake, and the wood is sacred and historical. She said it took her years to finally create something with it. And she says that many people are drawn to it, to the simplicity, and that she wants them to take away what they wish from it. To Naomi, it depicts the injustice of that time and the one that still exists for so many others now. And it's a very special piece to her because of the memories of her father and the pilgrimage that they went on. And at one time, an American flag collector wanted to buy this piece, and he told her that it was hung incorrectly. That she needed to actually flip the flags over, but she didn't do it because she says, I must have intuitively hung it this way as another expression of protest and injustice. So, and then this little piece here below it, she said her father peers into the disheveled Tule Lake incarceration camp barrack, where they scavenged wood for the Pledge of Allegiance flag. He spent his teenage years imprisoned there during World War II. She was shocked at the emotion he expressed as he ripped those boards off the building. He was just going at it. So thank you for coming. That's
Thank you.
It's so much work. So deep.
yeah, it is. Thank you for coming.
I think you need to have this exhibited other places.
We're trying, yeah, we're working on it. Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah. Totally. But yeah, you're free to walk around and look around some more if you wish.
Because the art that we've seen the years before is so different.